I like to play all kinds because it's all, as far as just from a drumming standpoint, it's all time to me. There was a studio in Englewood, New Jersey, where I grew up in Teaneck. And the studio was called, the first one was called Town Sound. And Ed Townsend, who wrote Let's Get It On, that was his studio. Then there was another studio down the block called Soul Sound, which turned out to be all platinum. And Joe and Sylvia Robinson, that was like the recruiting center for all the kids in the neighborhood that ever wanted to cut a record or do anything like that. So every day, everybody would, and it was one of those studios, it was like a cattle call for like musicians, you know. They would like say, yo, there's a session. And everybody that ever wanted to play, and if they could, you know, if the melodic instruments could stay in tune or anything like that, they would run down there. We'd all wait in this long line and woof each other and stab each other in the back to get these gigs. At any rate, the person who got the most gigs got on staff. And the beats that were happening along that time that was happening was Motown records were really hitting then, and Ringo Starr had a large influence on a lot of drummers that were playing because he plays in impeccable time. And Bernard Purdy influenced a lot of cats because he could play that funk, that real funk. And inside of what I'm getting ready to play, you'll probably hear some of that. So here it goes. But Bernard was playing a funk that was very heavily accentuated, like on quarter notes, like this thing was played all inside of the quarter notes, like was being played like this. Now, that was only, to me, as far as my interpretation was concerned, it was a slight embellishment off of what was going on in the Motown things, which was taking a lot of this quarter note feel that is happening here, and they would take that quarter note feel and they would put it on the snare drum. And every time that there was any play at all or any embellishment off of that time, it was done on the foot. And that sounded a little something like this. You can probably hear that on a bunch of records that you hear. If you listen to those Motown records, it was coming through like 63, 64, 65, 66, 67. Things like Bernadette, and Standing in the Shadows of Love, all the great Four Tops records, and a lot of Temptations records that had the same thing, where they just really capitalized off of that quarter note feel, and they put that quarter note feel right on the snare drum, which gave way. It was a cat playing then at that time named Benny Benjamin, and he didn't play a whole lot of drums, but what he did play, he just played the hell out of that. This. Famous fill. Came right at that. And at that time it was so easy to play that fill because the whole accentuation was in a very good body motion. Your body motion was going this way, and every time that your fills was on the beat, you were automatically leaning toward your crash cymbal, thusly. And when Sly's drummer came along, the best thing that I can remember about him is he was the first drummer that I had ever seen that played a very serious matched grip. And the basic parade grip, which is a traditional grip, what we'll use, was basically like this. And a lot of drummers at the time were playing like this because I don't think at that time actual power drumming was actually happening. So at that time, Sly's drummer was playing that same Motown thing. Like, but what he was also doing was he just picked up the tempo on it, and that particular beat represents another feel altogether once the tempo goes up on it. And that same Motown thing was happening here, like this. Once Sly's drummer got a hold of it, it started sounding like this. Now, I can remember there were a lot of records that came out in this tempo. It was still heavily accentuated on this one thing, which most records at the time were coming out like that. It was very heavy accent on 2 and 4, which that was the whole funk thing altogether. Heard It Through the Grapevine, which was going like this. Same thing was coming back to those quarter notes. Now with all of that and the coming of a lot of horn bands, which at that time, I was starting to get into a little bit more studio work. And as the horn bands began to take over the scene, it was a large influx of influences that came. It was obvious, very obvious, of who was listening to their father's old record collections. When I became like 14, 15, 16, things like that, most of our parents grew up with Count Basie and Duke Ellington and things like that. And here came all of these bands, Chicago, Blood, Sweat, and Tears, with the coming of rock rhythm sections and a lot of horns, Chicago, Blood, Sweat, and Tears, a group called the Ides of March, Tower of Power, a group called Cold Blood. There were a lot of, and for years, all of the R&B acts had just kept horns with them for years. James Brown, Otis Redding, every band that I'd ever played with had like 4 or 5 horns. Baritone was never a big thing to have in your band because everybody had it. So with that, what had happened is to basically interpret time as it was going in those days. And this was before miking drums became very popular. In those days, there was a club around the corner. Not around the corner, but around the corner up the block. It's now SIR, but it was called the Cheetah then. And I can remember then they would set a drummer on the riser maybe 10 feet in the air. Like 10 feet, like way behind the band. And maybe 28 to 30 feet. I can remember a measurement of 28 feet, but it was basically like 30 feet that they would put behind the band, and you could never feel any bass in your feet. And if you wanted to really groove, you had to think about where your body was going to be, where you were playing, in association with how people were dancing. And if people were dancing like this, and you wasn't going to really try to kill yourself trying to make your licks felt, you had to try to fit your licks in places where the band wasn't, or either you had to put your licks in a place where the band was, very deliberately. I can remember a tune we was playing called "I Got That Feeling," if anybody remembers it, by James Brown. And what it became is an incorporation as to what you were interpreting as time and how you could incorporate playing a lick with horns and the band and keep that within the framework of your groove. And to me, that gave way a certain awareness of like maybe eighth notes, as opposed to the quarter note thing that I was talking about. And that gave way, I think, to the certain feel that brought itself about like this. And I'm going to play those quarter notes, and I'm going to show you exactly how that eighth note influence brought itself out. And we were playing like... What had happened is when that eighth note brought itself into the picture as far as a lot of records were concerned, you could hear this on a bunch of records in the late 60s. You could hear that eighth note, 1, 2, and. You could hear that and of 2 on a bunch of records, like... What had happened is now that I think at that particular point it made people a little bit more aware of what actual studio drummers were doing, because they were basically changing the trend as where the beats were falling in records. Not that it was any more difficult than anybody else, not that it took any more concentration or anything like that, but I think at that time drummers became a little bit more aware of where beats were happening. They could still keep the groove happening, but just wasn't nobody else playing them at that time. So at All Platinum then we were cutting a lot of ballads then. And a lot of ballads were like 3/4 time, which is like 3/4 here. 3/4, 6/8 time. 6/8 is basically the same feel. One is faster than the other one. And you had to produce this kind of feel. And at that time, when that feel was going on, the only time that the drummer basically had a feel, which is customarily when the tunes were changing, like from the verse to the chorus. Nothing that interrupted the basic motion of the movement. Now at that particular time, I think the most important thing that I learned as far as playing time like this is that playing time like this, you were there and you had to be solid, but your whole function was to just push the arrangement along, never to beat it, but just push it along so that everything that your body was supposed to do, it was doing it because you were playing it that way. So you ended up putting up little things like that that kept the feel going, but it never did interrupt the flow. Now at that particular point, I think that people became more aware of the fact of like body motion. Where is your body while you're playing in the chair? Where is it? If you're rocking, if you're playing something that's just pushing the arrangement along like this, how do you do? If you're rocking, think about where your body's gonna be, which gave away, when it was time to take this into a stronger feel than this, where your body was had a lot to do with it. Now if you're backbeat, if you're right-handed like me and you play your backbeat on your left hand, what was basically happening is I would always be way back here when it came time to bring it up and play on the snare drum, because that's where your body is. And became a very conscious of body motion. became aware of body motion in a tempo like this, it made you very conscious of how much time that you had to do whatever fills that you wanted to do within the framework of the arrangement or the song or whatever. Like, you would never try to do a fill and make your crash over here if your natural body motion was going to be over here. Like, your body is exactly where it is. Now, I truly believe that for you to sound strong and for you to get your attitude across in your plan, don't ever try to do anything to deceive where your body is, because your body doesn't tell lies on anybody. If you try to sit back in the chair and you try to play to a particular area, like this cymbal area or this tom-tom area, and your natural body motion is back here as you're grooving, there's no way that this is going to sound strong if you play it over here. Example is like... Now, it has a very final tone, and it has a natural finality to it. But for me to make that crash, as far as my body motion was concerned, I would try to make it over here if I was leaning this way, thusly. Same thing. Now you're here, in this whole area that's right here, this whole area, you're free to make another crash if you want to. You're there because the strength of your body, where you mean for it to be, is right there in the middle. Records at the time that I'm going back to, I'm referring to at this time, had more of that than any other time up until very recently, within the last 2-3 years, when people became very deliberate about whether they wanted cymbal crash. I want to crash here, bing. I want to crash there, bam. They wanted all of this and all of that. And they were just judging that off of what they heard off of other records and so forth and so on, wanting you to do something different, but was sticking right to the customary thing. Wrong. So, so after that particular time, I noticed a lot of drummers became very expressive. Everybody wanted to be expressive. Everybody wanted to show how much chops they had. They wanted to show licks. They wanted to show what they were dreaming about when they went to bed last night, after they learned what they learned at the gig and all this other stuff. So what it ultimately become is everybody wanted to play. Everybody was a musician. Everybody is a musician. But what it came to be is that certain beats that were very prominent at that time, something like this. Let me think. What ended up happening with that is, by the time that you brought that to the studio and you would try to use that actual beat in a record or a track where there was, the sound was mixed and everything, and it was, perfect separation on all your drums, what started happening is people started noticing that there were many different ways to play the same notes. And what I mean the same notes is eighth notes were happening then. They just popped out of nowhere. Eighth notes started jumping out the walls on people. And feeling-wise, with the body motion, people would play them like this. Now, with that motion, it would give you this. Now, playing that beat with the natural body motion that you had more of a tendency to pick up on that beat, to speed up or take it closer to an edge, because you were leaning on the edge playing it here anyway. You were leaning your whole body was leaning over playing it. So it became, like I said. So what happened is people started to wonder, now why does that still sound like those quarter notes? Why? Because people were playing actual quarter notes. And they were putting in an accent that just happened to, it was a grace note. That grace note was in the back. So you started getting all of the note value of the quarter note, but you never got the actual feel of the eighth note that was behind it. So then we started straightening it out. And instead of putting the accent on the first beat of it. We started straightening out the whole thing so that all of the eighth notes got every bit of their note value. And by that I mean all the notes sounded with no accents, just straight eighth notes. What that did is that made a beat when people were dancing that time, and the dances that people were doing then were basically leaning over. And that whole eighth note pattern at that particular time accommodated that groove very nicely. That's the way the groove went, that's the way your body went. And when people straightened that groove back up, which Steve Gadd, a good friend of mine, was very closely responsible for, because he had a lot to do with how that whole groove went from that actual whole R&B thing and that whole, you know, chops, going to bed and that type of thing, brought itself into Steve. It brought it to the business that we know how to play notes, and we know how to play classic notes, and we know how to play notes that are supposed to be in the right place at the right time, and they're not too busy, and in the right place, and my body is every place that I want it to be at the time. Steve was in a lot of rhythm sections. At that time, Van McCoy was very hot. He had introduced a whole new business concept to the business. It was the hustle, as people started dancing and touching each other again. And the tempo at that time was like, it was very easy. It was about right here. Remember that? Right? And at that time, Steve was doing very classic fills because his fills covered all of the places where his body was. Like if he'd be playing. What was happening at that time is made it very comfortable to play, because playing for me at that time meant that all you had to do was just stick your hands in the general vicinity of wherever your drums were. And if you were meticulous about the notes that you wanted to come out, then all of a sudden you didn't have to play 15 notes to mean one. And what I mean by that is a lot of times people would play fills that started off with a lot of notes, and it was very unnecessary, something like this, inside the frame of a groove like this. That sounds nice and all that sounds fine, but on a record you would probably end up having stepped all over somebody else's fill, which is not nice, and eventually you start fasting involuntarily when you do that, you know. Things get very hungry. But Steve was one of the forerunners, I think, in my opinion, the guy that brought it to the business. He says, wherever your body is, that's where you are. And I'll illustrate that. I'll try to do a little series of fills, if you know where they are. If you know where they are. And then I'll show you a little bit of something where I'm talking about. Now, I'll basically relate to that hustle tempo that was happening at that time, and I'll play the fills off of that to show you basically what's coming off. Okay, here we go. We use a few 16th notes for that, just to show you what I'm talking about. Every place that I was at that particular time, my head was as far as this far down, my arm was as far as this far up, this arm, and I'll probably do, well, wait a minute, I'll do something with this arm and show you exactly what I'm talking about as far as that body motion is concerned. It wasn't a real good example, but you saw where my arm went if you're watching this. Okay. So now, after that basic period that started happening, a guy approached me one day and he says, listen, this new thing coming out called syndromes, man. You should really get on it. Because it's the thing. And at that particular time, I was the person I was most impressed with playing syndromes was Rick Murata. He played them better than anybody I'd ever heard, with more taste or whatever. He's probably one of the first guys playing it. Maybe. I don't know. But it became very obvious to me at that particular point that I didn't want to play him because if I did, I would be listening exactly to him because he was the best as far as I was concerned. And I would have ended up sounding like him going in that thing. So I became very conscious of how your drums sound. Now, thinking about how your drums sound, I like to think of it in terms of every one of the drums having a character with each other, so that the motion that you have with the drums is just like body posture in the chair. The motion you have, you can have a falling motion like this. Now, with the notes going descending, or the sizes of the drums being larger in respect to each other, you get a deeper tone. Isn't that so? See? Watch. Right? And back in the 50s, in the 60s, when the basic drum fill in the records that was happening was this. You got that feel, and the whole American, well, matter of fact, the whole world was listening to rock and roll, or basically any kind of popular music at that particular time was very used to drums having a finality that basically ended on the floor tom. Our whole culture was geared for that, just like you knew you could get a candy bar with a dime at that particular, you can make a phone call with a dime. You know, people basically look for this. You know what I mean? Okay. So, I said, oh, that sounds nice, but we have to sound different. We have to sound different. So, after a lot of the things that came in with Steve, that Steve was doing, bringing it back up, you know, early into the 70s, Harvey Mason introduced a lick to the business that's still on records today, right now, just a monster. And Harvey brought that beat back in a tune called Chameleon that he played with Herbie Hancock. And that beat was something like this. Now, with that, and this is after basically the hustle had run its course, and disco was happening at that time. And what disco was all about was, it was a very vertical dance motion, because the whole groove itself was very vertical. And what I mean by vertical is very up and down. It was, got it? Like low bottom is very up and down. So they broke up the up and down, and they had a little technique happening. It's what they call cymbal kissing, which you did on your hi-hats, and it went like this. Now, when I put all of this together, I basically show you where, with the hand movement that you had in your right hand, all you were basically doing was just helping this tempo along that I established with this hi-hat like this. Just to make the note thicker, it didn't really change the sound, it just made what was going on louder, and then add to it and forward to it, and you had disco. somebody thought it would be a very bright idea one day. After cutting about 5 or 6 sessions, 5 or 6 tunes in a session where he was really tired and he didn't feel like playing disco the rest of the day, he felt that he should augment the beat. So all of a sudden, this went to this. What happened with that is it was in a very deep hope that that extra note that was added there to the cymbal technique would kind of flatten out that whole disco thing so that it didn't sound so up and down. People didn't look comfortable dancing like that. They didn't look comfortable walking like that. They didn't look comfortable grooving like that. Or it didn't look comfortable to me. So, and I never believed any rhythm should just ride along, and people would tell me that just play the lobotomy groove on sessions and things like that. So I never believed in time being just time, because time is the essence of all music. Even if it has no time, they'll tell you that it doesn't have any. But time is the essence of all music. Or I can't play a gig by myself. So what it come to is after the whole disco thing, people started looking around for something, I think, again, that just felt different. People, I think, were trying to get back to a very horizontal motion when they played or when they danced, because people were dancing horizontally. People were breathing when they danced. You know, it wasn't just straight up and down, and it didn't feel like straight up and down no more. People were moving like this. Now, when I'm playing, that's what I'm doing in the chair, because, you know, you watch people dance at concerts and all this other stuff as they're doing what they're doing, the records they dance to, and so forth and so on. So we try to devise ways that you could play, and by you playing, people could see exactly how you were grooving to what you were grooving to. So we started getting away from that whole disco thing, and we started getting basically back to that funk, taking all of the notes out, all of the notes. We went from going to this. To this. We said, why we need all of them notes? You don't need all of them notes. Because the feel that's going to eventually end up happening is going to be off of the notes that are the most strong notes out of all of those notes that you're playing. So we said, well, let's dump the lumps. Let's dump all of the notes. So all of a sudden, we reduce this to this. So maybe we need to dump some more notes just out of that field to make it happen. So we said, well, how can you dump any more notes than quarter notes? There's the time right there. So we said, well, maybe take half of that. So we started going like this. Now with that one little move right there, that just gave me an idea. And I'll tell you what happened is I became a little bit more aware that by subtracting some of the notes out of a groove that you were playing, it made a lot more room for if you wanted to play something that encompassed or had to take a lot of notes to do it, all of a sudden you had more room. You just had more room to do it. And what I mean, I'll play something with a lot of notes in it, and I'll play something with less notes in it, what I'm trying to illustrate, and I'll show you exactly what I'm talking about. In this tempo right here. like that. Now, what happened is we took all of those notes out of that tempo and we made it this. Now, what that happens is with that tempo, just that whole thing, and you can sing it to yourself, it was going boom, bap, bap, boom, boom, bap, bap, and people was dancing, and all of your moves, all of a sudden, all of the moves that you wanted to do while you were dancing, you had space to do it. And people started dancing more comfortable then. And I started keeping a little bit more of a watchful eye, because dancing can basically dictate what type of music we play. The music we play doesn't dictate how people react to it, because people are constantly making up dances. They make up 5 or 6 dances every tempo that comes out, and every new dance tempo that comes out, they'll make up a new one. Everybody's watching the girls, if you're shaking it right and everything else, and that's where it goes. So now, dropping less notes is just like balancing a budget. If you have less notes here and you have more to deal with on the other side, then you start revamping and putting those notes in different places, and all of a sudden, you have what sounds like a different groove, and maybe it was just played on a different drum. Classic example is the 50 Ways to Leave Your Lover groove that Steve Gadd was playing, right? Now this whole thing that I was playing here is basically an old shoe shine parlor groove that comes out of New Orleans. Just that groove, I think, was basically a recognition of what we call, or what certain people in New Orleans, they call it, like a ragtime. Not necessarily the ragtime that was happening in the 20s as far as the early influx of jazz brought into our mainstream is concerned, but I mean ragtime as far as rags, the way that shoe shine parlor men would pop rags when they shined men's shoes. And it was basically like in a shuffle, like not like straight notes like this, but it was like a shuffling. With that shuffle, when that shuffle opened up as becoming like that particular shuffle, that Louisiana rag shuffle, you could go into any date and the producer would be able to tell you that very clearly. Give me that Louisiana rag shuffle, and you'd know exactly what he was talking about. Or he would talk about, give me that meters groove, which was brought into our mainstream by a bunch of guys in New Orleans called the Neville Brothers, or a lot of people recognize him by the Meters, or Alan Toussaint. But Alan Toussaint was the cat that put slow funk, I mean real slow funk, back into the groove, something like this. After that, there was a large influx of like fusion drummers. And what I mean by fusion, what fusion meant to me, the way that I was playing is it sounded like it was a very expressive jazz groove going on that you could play funk to and get away with it. Now, when that started really kicking off, then here comes the samba. Everybody said, well, let's get third world with it and let's get sunshiny. So, all of a sudden, this became this. Now, so people was playing sambas and they was playing it to death, especially fast sambas that would accommodate a lot of fusion things that was happening, and you didn't have to be playing all that much samba to just get that to accommodate that groove. After, you know, people started becoming hipped up to a little bit of samba, they started to say, well, how can I take some funk and put it in the samba and make it sound like a funk samba? So, as people were playing sambas, they were going like... With adding a little bit of funk to that, the way I hear it, would probably sound like this. I had always wanted to be a person that could play drums in the studio, and the producer would say, "Well, give me that real fast feel that you were playing before," and you would go like this. You'd be playing your groove, and all of a sudden you do a fill, and you go. Say, no, that ain't it. So I said, oh, okay. Well, let's try this. He said, no, that ain't either. So it'd finally get around to the point where I would play a very simple fill that would catch his imagination, maybe something like this. Yeah, that's what I like. He said, play it again. So I'd play it again. I go. He said, no, that ain't it. So I said, wow. Now I got to make him think that this is my last dying breath playing this groove. So here we go. So I'd go. Like, he said, yeah, that's it. Why didn't you play that before? I said, aha. So now, it became very obvious. I said, if that man is sitting back across the other side of the glass in that studio and he's looking at you and you don't look like you're having a ball, and he ain't going to think that that's what it is that you just played. So I said, oh. So now, with that body motion thing, I started incorporating more of that back into the way we were cutting records. And I can only illustrate again by something I would play. that was the perfect combination of like where you got to put your body motion, where it's got to be. If you've ever gone to concerts sometimes and you've seen those guys that play the cymbals, and they got cymbals all over here, and all out here, and all over there, and it looks great. It looks great. But one of these days, that guy's gonna be doing a drum fill or something, and he's gonna have to go like that. And that's why he got all of those drums, and you hear him, and he doesn't sound strong when he does the things that he's got to sound strong because it's just not there. Maybe he should get him a couple of little midgets to stand out here and hit them things where he can't get them, you know, put them on the payroll for $5 or $6 a gig. But he can't put them over there because that doesn't work. But everything is right in where your body's going to be the strongest. Right here, toms, you can hit very strong notes right here. Now, the tom-toms are very close. They're right at the edge of your hands so that you never have to reach to play. The minute that you have to reach to play your drums, you're going to hurt your body. You're going to hurt your body bad. Consult your local chiropractor if you want to find out, but believe me, I'm telling you, you'll hurt yourself if you have a very incorrect seating posture. So do anybody want to ask anything?
Who do you think in particular was responsible for bringing the 16th note, you know, in? You talked about Purdy being influential with the quarter note. From there on, who do you think helped bring the 16th note feel in?
Well, there was a drummer that used to cut a lot of Motown tracks here in New York that they would send out to Detroit, and he eventually ended up being one of the house musicians in Motown, a guy named Benny Benjamin. That when he incorporated that snare drum, that quarter note snare drum feel on the snare drum, the thing that accommodated it the most was some 16th notes, which that's what made that quarter note feel so spaced out, because there was 16ths enough happening on the top. But he was one of the more excellent timekeepers of our time, and very unrecognized as well.
Do you do any type of body conditioning, like for physical strength?
Yes, I do. I do a lot of push-ups. I'm getting back into running a little bit more, just for the stamina thing, because as I was on the road this last time, out with Luther Vandross, you know, we were doing like, this was a bus tour. So we had time, you know, to be in places and settle down for like a day or something like that before we started to play. Or, you know, sound check or anything like that. And running is about the best thing for stamina if you can't find any place to swim. Swimming is really happening. But to do those push-ups every day and just be aware of the stamina that, you know, has to go forth and doing what you're doing is like, that's like a universal exercise. You can't go wrong doing those. And always do them in the morning. Always do them in the morning. Or when you think of morning, maybe some people might have as weird a schedule as I do, but as soon as you get up, because the better you get your blood flowing, the less chance you have of having spasms. And when you're doing, say, a concert tour, especially this part of the year where it involves switching climates a lot and going, say, maybe from Miami today to Chicago to go to the show. Now you can't take a shower and just go running out because it's 20 degrees. So you have to do something to like really get your muscle, not speaking of being cleanliness with your muscle, but I mean the hot water really does, you know, do a number. But to do those push-ups first thing in the morning really can make a remarkable change in your stamina approach. That young lady, I mean that young gentleman right there? Yeah, go ahead.
What other kinds of exercises would you recommend?
Well, anything, I mean, you can run, you can do push-ups, you can swim, you can do, you know, whatever, as long as it is basically related to, you know, your stamina approach. There's a chart that you can get. I think they have them at those Herman's sporting goods stores. That there's like a set of stretching and a set of like toning exercises that you can use for whenever you sit down to play, which is actually the chart that you use for racquetball. But it works for drummers. I have a little stretching program that I go through. take your sticks like this and put them in your hand, and hold them with your palms up like this. Can you get all of this? And then hold on as tight as you can. Hold on to the sticks as tight as you can, and turn them inside out. And keep hold on to the stick. Do not let it go. And go up over your head as far as you can go. And then all the way down to the floor, and touch your knuckles on the floor. You might have to bend over a couple of times to actually get it, but you get it.
I have one more question for you, Yogi.
I thought that when you played the drums, you played with the tip of the stick on the drum. I noticed that you play with the round end.
Yeah. Because more actual stick that attacks the surface of the drum, the more sound you get out of the drum. Now, if you can hear the difference in this on the soundtrack, I'll show you. But this does not sound as powerful as this. It just doesn't. Because there's more actual surface of the stick is attacking the actual skin of the drum. And that's just a habit that I got into being in the studio, because I like to play hard in the studio, because the microphones get a much stronger and they get a much clearer signal, so that the engineer doesn't have that much work to do if a strong signal is what he's actually looking for.
What kinds of music do you like to play?
Do I like to play? I like to play all kinds, because it's all, as far as just from a drumming standpoint, it's all time to me. You know, if it's got a groove, I like to play it. You know, I have played some bluegrass that's got more groove than George Clinton. You know, and then I played some funk that's got more straw in it than Merle Haggard, you know. But believe it or not, and I'm gonna tell you this, it's all time, just for the drums. If you're looking at it, you know, having a certain, you know, studio background or whatever, if you're looking at it just from time up, like what is everybody gonna put on top of what I'm playing to really make it what it is? It's all just time to me. There've been tracks that I've cut for like the B-52s and B-52s and Twyla Tharp and people like that, that I had no idea what that stuff was gonna sound like by the time that they got finished with it. And, you know, I just said, well, look, just keep yourself in this head, just time. Don't think about where it's going, think about where you're putting it now. So, I've said all that to say I like the funk. Oh yeah, I just wanted to say one thing about gigging. It's a couple of don'ts that I like to tell anybody that's trying to come into playing music. And when I mean by playing music professionally, I mean paying your rent, and your old lady doesn't have to be scared to have kids or anything like that. I'm talking about really playing for the way that you eat. Is if you're going to get a date and you think you're going to be late when you take it, don't take it. Never do a gig that you don't think that you'll be good at. And what I mean, the client will respect you more is if you know that there's somebody that does that better than you. And I mean noticeably better if you know in your heart. Get them to do it, but always give somebody your best. Never come in the joint and sound like you're trying to do something. Always just be doing it. And if you're tired, never go to work. If you're really that tired. Because when I started making a transition from coming from all platinum into New York, doing a lot of dates, of these names, I'll be nameless, but there were a lot of guys, man, they do sessions where there were 5 or 6 songs in the sessions, and they would call me in to tighten up the 5th and 6th songs. And it was just clearly a result of the guy being tired. You know, just tired. It takes a long time to do that. So never do that, and always just because of the physical nature of the drums, if anybody's gonna, you know, be influenced by what I have to say about it, always try to take care of your body in just such a way that you're an athlete. Because when you're playing drums, and like in the Rose Bowl in Pasadena, that was like, we did Ashford and Simpson there, and it was like to play like their show, and it's a very high energy show. To play that show for an hour and 15 minutes, you got to be in some kind of shape. You know, there's no such thing as reaching over on a button and just turning the drums up. You got to throw it down. You know, really. And I strongly recommend that, because there's very few drummers that play real strong. And what I mean by playing real strong is I mean play real strong for an hour and 20 minutes. you know, an hour and 20 minutes, and then get a chance to get a swig of a Heineken and have to come right back and maybe do it like Santana does, hour and a half encores. They'll play for 2 hours and something, you know. And if you want to sound believable, remember, you know, when you're playing music with people and you're in an ensemble, these people are counting on you to keep their time together. Guitar players want you to sound strong enough that if they want to try something new, that you got the time nailed down so good that they can try it. Or they'd like to know that you're sensitive enough and that you're listening to them enough that if they do try something and it doesn't come all the way out, that you can key off of them and play something and bring them back into the arrangement good enough. And nothing brings that in like strength. Like, this is what I meant to do. Blam! Wham! Like that. You know, and even if you blew it totally, no one will ever know.